My next guest is Tim Ballard. He's a former member of the CIA, former undercover operator at DHS who would hunt down the most vile human beings on Earth, child traffickers. He's made it his life's mission to save every last child on Earth from the scourge of human trafficking, which is sadly one of the most profitable businesses in the world. His work has been turned into a new movie called The Sound of Freedom, starring Jim Caviezel. Mira Sorvino comes out on July 4th. Jim Caviezel plays Tim in the movie, and here's a clip.
This job tears you to pieces. And this is my one chance to put those pieces back together.
When God tells you what to do, you cannot hesitate.
And we're thrilled to have the real Tim Ballard here on Redacted to talk about all of this and more. Tim, great to meet you and great to have you here on the show.
Thanks for having me on. Honored to be here.
Well, it's a real pleasure and a real treat. I want to take our audience back a little bit and kind of paint a picture here, because I think for every one of our audience members who I see it nightly when I watch our live stream and I see our chat and I see the tens of thousands of people that watch our show, for a lot of them, they understand what is happening with human trafficking and child trafficking. But for every one person who knows it, there are many more that are just shocked. And they said, oh my God, I can't believe this is actually happening. Why do you think there's not more awareness about the horrors of human trafficking, child trafficking? Why do you think we don't know about it?
I think there's two reasons that come to mind. One is it's so dark, it's hard to look at it. People see this issue, they see stories on it, and they superimpose, without even wanting to, their own children's faces there. I've done that. So I understand. But there's also, I think, something else going on where there's agendas at play, and people. I mean, there's 2 million children in the commercial sex trade. That's according to State Department and others. That's not including those outside of commercial sex trade, but just abuse. That's a big number. That's a big number, and there has to be an even bigger number that justifies that demand. And that's the number of people who are involved in this, people who want this, and they're in every level. They're in positions of government. We see this with the Jeffrey Epstein, definitely in Hollywood. So there's definitely this force to stop it, or exaggerate it to the point where it's not credible anymore. Make it sound like it doesn't really exist. And we have to combat that. That's why we know when we do our live missions, we've done over 4,000 operations. We film as much as we can to prove that this is real. This is really, really happening. And I did a case last year. I hope we can talk about it at some point. Started in Ukraine. I mean, if I told that story and there weren't cameras rolling, no one would believe it. No one would believe what happened to us and what we did. And that's why we film everything, because people don't want to believe it's real.
How did you first come to this? How did you first learn this was happening? Were you at the CIA and they said, hey, Tim, this is something we're working on. We want you to be brought in on this. Or was this something that you learned of? I'm just curious how you came to this and devoted your life to it.
Yeah, I didn't learn about it till I was back at DHS. And I did not go to DHS knowing much about it. I was there doing drug cases, money laundering. And 6 months into my job, this was about 2002, they called me in and said, hey, we're starting a new group that's going to be fighting child crimes and child sex crimes. And I mean, I was just like, what is that? And it took us actually starting to infiltrate. Someone created some software back in that time, and it was part of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, where we were able to start finding the end users of child rape material, child, pornography. And that's what kind of opened our eyes. Like, what in the hell? There's thousands, now millions of transfers of child exploitation material, child rape videos in the U.S. Every day. And that's a true thing. We start seeing these numbers. That's kind of where our eyes opened up. That's just the tip of the iceberg, because we get the images. Where are these kids? It seemed like at the time, most of the kids were foreign, even though the U.S. produces quite a bit of child exploitation material. But we were seeing all these foreign kids. How do you find them? Well, it's impossible to find them. How do you find them? So that's kind of how my eyes got open. And then they, in 2006, the laws changed, allowing U.S. agents to go after Americans who sexually abuse children overseas and hold them accountable as if they committed the act in the US. So then they put me into undercover schools, sent me overseas to go hunt these guys. Then I get there and then I start realizing, oh my gosh, like maybe in the US it's mostly digital online abuse. That's where it kind of originates. Here on the beaches of Colombia or in the Caribbean, man, it's just right in your face. Like they come up to you on the beach and say, here, there's a 12-year-old in that house for $500, you can go bleep her. Like what is going on? And then so it's kind of progressive for me. And then it's like, okay, I now believe the stats. That say there's 2 million children in a commercial section. In fact, I think it's low. And that's what led to eventually, you start getting deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where even the US government's policies and procedures stop you from doing what you need to do. And that's what happened in 2013. I was in Colombia working a case as a consultant trainer, but got too passionate, got involved, made myself very connected to the plan to rescue over 100 kids. And ultimately the US government said, you have no business down there, that you don't have jurisdictional authority. And we have no budget for this. They said, come home. I said, I can't. And that's when we quit. It was and that's what the basis of Sound of Freedom is. That's where it starts.
So you quit the DHS. That's what I was going to ask you. At what point do you think, well, the tools that the U.S. government has at their disposal, there aren't enough. It's not enough for what I'm doing now. Of course, you've founded your group called Our Rescue, which I said the other night on the show. I said, if there's a charity that you want to give money to, like I can't think of a better one, right? I mean, what you guys do to go out and try to rescue these children is unbelievable. When did you find like, hey, the tools of the U.S. government are not good enough for what I need to do here?
So it was all during that time, mostly in 2013, where it was just like the disparity of the tools between the U.S. government and other foreign governments. And to me, there's no borders or boundaries when it comes to this stuff. It's transnational. The bad guys are here. The kids are there. The bad guys are there. The kids are here. They're everywhere. Right. So everybody needs the tools. And the disparity, like I'd go into these countries, they knew nothing. That's why I was in Colombia, actually, just to consult on some operations that the State Department asked me to go help on. And I'm like, they knew nothing. Like the kids are hopeless in certain countries of being rescued because no one even knows they're here or they don't know how to find them. So that was the main thing. It wasn't that the U.S. government wasn't building the tools, and they were, and they still are. It's that how you get it everywhere. And when they said, come home and leave this country that doesn't have any tools, that's when I said, I'm done coming home. I'm going to stay. And if that means I got to quit, I'll quit. And we did. My wife and I, we made the decision to quit and we launched to do the rescue operation and ended up being one of the largest recorded in history in terms of how many kids we rescued in a small window of time.
Now, forgive a fairly ignorant question, but I think for people who don't know what this is or the scope of it, you look at this, what is child sex trafficking? How does it start and how big actually is it? What does it actually mean when you say that phrase?
So another way to put it is slavery. It's when your person is controlled by another person. And there's three main categories: labor, slave labor, organ harvesting, and sex trafficking. And we work on all three of those. Yeah, you'd be shocked. I run an organization. I'm the CEO, called the Nazarene Fund, which was founded by Glenn Beck in 2014 as a way to help persecuted Christians in the Middle East when ISIS came in. We've stayed there, and the organ harvesting cases there in Africa are just insane. So that's the scope of it. When you get to the kids, so there's 30 million people enslaved altogether. That's roughly the estimate. Worldwide. And those three, and that's men, women, and children. And that's more than ever in the history of the world. We've never had that number of slaves living, ever. In fact, you could count up all the people that were enslaved during the 350-year period of the transatlantic slave trade. You can add them all up, and there's more people alive in slavery today than all of those combined. Wow. So in terms of just numbers, and so not to downplay at all what that slavery was. There's nothing worse, but just in terms of numbers, that's what it is. So with all those people enslaved, the traffickers make $150 billion every year.
$150 billion.
$1 billion off the backs of those slaves. And then in terms of buying and selling people, that number is 32 billion in terms of just the market of buying and selling. The United States, we're the number one consumer almost every year of child exploitation material. and we're in the top 3 for destination countries for human trafficking. But it makes sense, the economy of it, right? The people that want it are here consuming it. Well, how about bring the kids to them, which is really easy to do these days because our southern border just facilitates the work of child traffickers.
That's amazing to me. We've been covering this extensively here on the show at the border, at the southern border, and all of the unaccompanied minors that are coming across the border. So the United States is the #1 consumer of like digital material, and
Correct.
the 3rd on the list of actual human consumption. Like Americans are buying these children, utilizing these children, using these children.
It's we are the we're in the top 3 almost every year, and the State Department recognizes it, and they put it in the trafficking in persons report. So that's why the southern border issue becomes even more relevant, because anyone can bring a kid in now. These traffickers are making, according to Wall Street Journal, and I believe it, about $14 million every single day. It's so easy. They kidnap a child in Central America, which is not hard to do. There's little recourse for doing that. They bring them up to the border. I mean, there's in the last, just during this administration alone, there's been 85,000 unaccompanied minors. I've seen the stats. Thousands of these kids are 5 years old or younger showing up alone. What's going on? But I've been on the border. I see what happens. They're given a little, if you're a child, there's a policy that you have to release that child within 72 hours, which it seems like compassionate, but it's the opposite of. In fact, this whole enforcing the border is the only compassionate thing because of what we're allowing to happen. So these kids show up unaccompanied or accompanied. They get across, and they'll come with a little name, sometimes a safety pin to their shirts or in their pocket, and it just says, Joe Jones, phone number. Oh, this is the sponsor. This is the sponsor. By law, Health and Human Services, who then takes over from CBP and takes the kids into their care. Usually they'll give it out to a nonprofit who on the border takes them in. I've watched it happen. They pick up the phone. Hello, we have little, Jose Gonzalez here. Here's here's my address. Send him over. Then our taxpayer dollars puts the kid on a bus, on a plane, and takes him right there, finishes the last leg of the trafficking journey. And now you're in the hands of the sponsor. Now imagine a 5-year-old kid turns up alone in New York City or Orlando or Salt Lake City or anywhere. What would happen? That kid would be taken in, cared for. That kid would be, you wouldn't just give the kid away to anybody. The kid would, you do a background check, DNA test. Like, this kid would be protected. You wouldn't just someone show up and say, hey, I'm his sponsor. Okay, have a nice day. It's so disgusting what we are doing. They used to call Trump racist for his border enforcement policies. It's the opposite. It's what we're doing to foreign children and not treating them with the dignity that we would a U.S. child who turned up alone. I mean, it's the opposite. The only compassionate thing is enforce the border and de-incentivize these trafficking organizations from walking kids across. And when we talk about the economy of pedophilia, knowing that we have this huge population of pedophiles, it's obvious what's going on here. But no one seems to want to do anything about it in this administration.
Maybe it's not so obvious, and I know this is going to be hard for some of our audience to hear, but I want to hear, and I think it's important for us to hear. You use the example of a 5-year-old. What happens to a 5-year-old that comes in and then gets sucked into this sex trafficking in the United States? They've passed that sponsorship moment. Now they're shipped off. Right. What is the end scenario for that child? Can you give me a couple of sad examples of this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can give you, there's if you watch Sound of Freedom, you'll see there's a scene. They actually filmed this scene exactly at the port of entry on the southern border where it happened. It's what kicks off the whole journey and the rescue journey. But a little boy had been kidnapped by a pedophile, an American pedophile who lived in San Bernardino, California, and was bringing him across the border. And the Customs and Border Protection officials identified, thank goodness for a wall, because a wall forced him into that funnel where he could be identified. That's walls save lives, right? Border enforcement saves lives. But they got the little boy out, but they discovered all these sex tapes in the van of this man sexually abusing the little boy. That led to raiding his house in San Bernardino, and we found 12 other kids. So what he was doing with them is a real example. When we raided his house on July 4th of 2006, we identified that he had basically a child porn studio built into his house, cameras everywhere. He was filming. He had a little production company, okay, for self-consumption mostly, I think. And he was making videos of these kids. He'd drug them up, rape them, take videos of it. Now others would then distribute those videos, sell those videos, and then people would come and partake in sex. I'm not talking about this case in particular, but this is the type of case, and I'm kind of telling you what happens in other places. You know, when there's been a 5,000% increase in child exploitation material. The U.S. is now one of the highest producers as well. So you can see there's probably a lot of production, a lot of selling these kids for sex. You can, you know, if in the adult sex industry, you know, whatever you pay in that given market, you're going to pay triple for a kid. So I know this because I've been in those situations buying and selling. And so it's very lucrative to have a child available.
Unbelievable.
We rescued a kid in Mexico last year. He'd been trafficked since he was 9 years old. I think we got him. He was like 11 now. I mean, he was $5,000 for 2 nights. And you know, an adult prostitute would be maybe $1,000 for 2 nights, depending. It's $5,000. And so that's why it's so lucrative.
Oh my God. And to think, you know, we're just talking about like this sleazy guy in San Bernardino. But how high does this go? Does it go into Hollywood? Does it go into Jeffrey Epstein? Does it go into all of these billionaires that are associated with this? That's the $6 billion question. That's a $154 billion question right there. How high does this go? In your experience, does it go all the way to the top?
It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. You know, it's one of these hidden crimes, you know, where it's closet crimes. There's no profile for it. You know, it's not always the greasy, dirty, you know, looking dude. There's no profile. And we've arrested over in my career, clergymen, law enforcement officers, professionals of any kind, educators. Like it's everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And I think the Jeffrey Epstein case is a good example of how it is in the highest levels. It's harder to get those guys, you know, because they're so protected. And I do think that's one of the reasons, you know, you don't see more of this, and why there's this campaign to discredit, you know, that it's even happening.
Right. Of course, they want to make it seem like it's fake. It's not really happening. This isn't a concern at the southern border, et cetera. And that's why we're trying to shed light on it here, because I don't absolutely stand for that. You, of course, mentioned Ukraine. You talked about and this is happening all over the world, but specifically, Mel Gibson reached out to you, actor Mel Gibson, and who had been starting to expose a lot of things in Hollywood over the years, and came to you, knew your name, and reached out to you to help with getting some children out of a really difficult situation. Can you talk about how? And then now I think because you've been filming it, there's a documentary coming together, and just tell me how you're associated with Mel Gibson. How did he reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Mel does so many good things behind the scenes, and you know, cameras off, he's just doing good things. He cares deeply about causes and wants good for humanity, and especially for children. So he was filming back in Budapest at the time that the Russians invaded, and he knew me because he had just volunteered his help to give some amazing notes for the film Sound of Freedom. You know, of course, him and Jim Caviezel work closely together. The Passion, and it's been announced that they're going to be filming the Resurrection. So I don't know much about that, but anyway, so I got a very random phone call on the same day that the Russians had invaded, and he said he had a list. He had been collecting a list. People have been, you know, from different people in his community about children who were orphans, and they were very worried about them because they're in the target zone of the war, and who's taking care of them, who's getting them out. And my wife was giving me a similar list. We have a program at OUR called Children Need Families, which sponsors adoptions. We had about 7 kids coming out of Ukraine last February. And so she was worried about them. So they both called. I had this list of names, and I called some friends of mine who I'm on their board called Aerial Recovery, and they go into hot zones and kind of help stabilize. And so we jumped on together and went into Ukraine and began the process of extractions, going into these places, and we got more names from the Ukrainian government of the orphans. And we saw horrible things, that sometimes the kids, it was too late. Sometimes, you know, the caretakers were gone, but the kids were still there, and we got them out. So it was very successful. And, at one point I called Mel from Ukraine and I just said, hey, I came, I'm here and it's working. I said, but I'm going to do a documentary. We're going to DNA Films, a production company, is going to do a documentary on this. Tony Robbins is actually producing. Mel Gibson's not producing it. I want to be very clear about that. That's the part. I don't know how that story got to that, but he definitely is not producing. But he said, I'll absolutely help you, any way I can. We thought it was going to be a one single series kind of thing of just helping kids in Ukraine. In the end, it's a 4-part series produced again by Tony Robbins. A couple other folks are also producing, and DNA Films. It's a 4-part series now, and the last 3 episodes aren't even in Ukraine because we had identified a pedophile ring that was trying to move children out of Ukraine. This was a Dutch pedophile group. They were a political party that had been disbanded. Well, they got disbanded after we took them down, but they're a political party whose objective was to legalize sex with children.
Out of the Netherlands.
Out of the Netherlands. And they believed that children, if you could consent to eating ice cream or go to the park, that you could consent to having sex. And so that's the agenda they were peddling. They were all arrested. They're 4 leaders. They were all arrested and awaiting trial for child crimes. Well, they all became fugitives. And the leader of the group we identified in Mexico. He was the one that we caught chatting with, was an undercover cop from Holland who works with us about moving Ukrainian kids. So he said, I got the American who's doing it. He introduced him to me. And I'm like, here I am in Ukraine. And we were training, we then trained some Ukrainian operators who could help us because they could play that role. And then from there, we identified the guy. He was hiding out in Mexico City. So then we went to Mexico City. We identified him, worked with the Mexican officials. He was arrested. We found all his child exploitation material hidden, and he's in jail now. And then from there, we found out that 2 of his lieutenants were hiding out in Ecuador, and they were even more threatening. They had a child sex hotel. They had a hotel in a little village called Canoa, Ecuador. It's a cute little boutique kind of hotel, but they were using it and getting it ready to be a child sex destination. And they were already trying to advertise for it. They've already abused up to 400 kids. We've set up an aftercare shelter in the town because the kids are slowly coming forward and saying this happened to me, and we're taking care of them, feeding them. Crazy case. That whole operation in just 4 months, and this is unheard of. Like, especially in law enforcement, but it's, if I were restrained with the government restraint, we couldn't do this. But 4 short months, we went through 6 countries, 3 continents. And rescued what will probably amount to hundreds and even thousands of preventative rescues. The prosecutor in Ecuador later called us and said, these guys were just about to launch their major campaign to advertise pedophiles around the world come here to this hotel. He's like, so you guys, we rescued thousands of kids who never will know they were rescued, right? They never were hurt. So that was all filmed because, we're trying to do a little documentary on Ukraine, and all of a sudden the cameras kept following us, and we have something I don't think anyone's ever seen. It's a case I've never done before. And it's called The Hidden War, and it will be coming out probably later this year.
Wow, that's amazing. Unbelievable. And I can't wait to see it, and we'll promote it here on the show absolutely when it comes out. That's amazing work. I just have to ask you about this piece of it because I've heard reports about the lifespan of these children, and makes me want to cry thinking about it. But to think about the people that you don't help, the kids that you aren't able to save, and the lifespan I've heard is anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 years for these children. And is that sadly where this organ harvesting part of the story comes into this?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's often what happens in these cases. I mean, these kids are brought up to serve, pedophiles. And so once they age out, either they'll usually work for the organization, or so many things can happen to them. And yes, absolutely, we have, and this is mostly with our work at the Nazarene Fund. We have, for example, in Eastern in Western Africa, just last year we took down several what we call baby factories. So what they do is they kidnap usually mentally challenged, mentally disabled young women, and they rape them incessantly, so they're pregnant incessantly, and they just they have they take these babies. They take the babies, and the babies are either used for, and these are just I'm talking days old, and they're then taken and used for the witch doctory, crazy this satanic ritualistic stuff. They're used for pedophiles, or they're probably more than the other two, used to sell their organs. I mean, you can sell a pediatric heart on the black market for about $250,000, and people will buy that because they don't want to wait in line. And so we took down these organizations. The same thing happened in the Middle East. ISIS was using the same evil acts to fund their operations, especially after they got pushed out of any kind of sovereign territory. And so we've been working in dismantling organ harvesting rings there as well. But it's we've seen it in Haiti too, and like when they lose their usefulness, these they're not people to these traffickers. They're like cattle. They're nothing. And if you're sick, we've had reports of they just kill the child right there, or use them for their organs. So it's messy, it's horrible, it's evil. And thank you for even asking the question. Very few people will ask these questions because it is so hard to talk about, but not talking about it just pushes further back the solution.
Well, we have a saying on here on this show. In fact, we have T-shirts on this show that says silence equals complicity. And so whether it's war, whether it's anything like this, we have to shine a light on the darkest part of this to try to fix it, to try to solve it. It's just awful. And so, and that's why this is so great that this movie is coming out, The Sound of Freedom, on July 4th. And Jim Caviezel, Mira Sorvino, going to be in this movie shining a light on this at a big level where people can actually see this and realize that this is not fake, this is real. How did this movie come about? Maybe we can, if you just want to share a little bit about how this movie came about and how did Jim Caviezel come to this project? I'm sure you've had a lot of interaction with him as he really sort of picked your brain about what this life is like.
Yeah. So one of our very first operations, the one that I told you that we left for, and it led to an operation on October 11th, 2014 in an island off of Cartagena, Colombia. It was actually a part of a 3-part operation. The movie depicts 54 kids being rescued. It was actually well over 120. There's a documentary coming out about that. It's going to follow in the wake of Sound of Freedom called Triple Take, which tells that story. But it got a lot of attention. Scott Pelley reported on it in CBS News, and that thing kind of went viral. We were brand new, so we didn't really know what to do with the media attention. But we started getting calls from production companies, and we visited with quite a few because they said, "What's this story? What's it about?" We turned. My wife was in charge to say yes or no because that's a scary thing. We don't know this world, and we didn't trust that world. She said no to the first 3 inquiries about it, until about 6 months later, we've met the producers of Sound of Freedom, and they came and we saw their work. We loved it. We loved them. They're amazing people. And they said, we want to make you an offer. We want to tell your story. So, they wrote the script, and that takes a long time. So I kind of lost track of them and thinking, I did some research. It's like 3% of movies that are in concept form go to the screen. So I thought it wasn't going to happen. They came to me in December of 2017 and said, we're going to shoot this summer in Colombia, and we need to pick an actor to play you. And you don't get to choose, but you can request. And I said, Jim Caviezel. Get Jim Caviezel. And they balked at that, because they said they want someone that looks a little bit more like me, because they had a plan at the end of the film, which they do. Have you seen it quite yet? Did they send you a screener?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
We'll get you a screener. At the end of the movie, they do a transformation where they kind of they show the actual footage of some of the scenes you saw in the film. And so they said, that's where you guys got to look something like each other. And I said, look, you have to figure that out. But look, as far as I'm concerned, Hollywood is one of the main reasons I even have to work. The smut they're putting out is in fact creating the demand in a lot of ways, and I don't trust that industry. So, but I do know that Jim Caviezel loves Jesus, and that's important to me. Because I know that he will have his head on straight, and he's a phenomenal actor. And Count of Monte Cristo is one of my favorite movies of all time. So they went to Jim, and he responded in 3 days. He I didn't know this. He had adopted 3 children from China, and he had adopted them out of trafficking situations.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it was very personal to him, and he picked up the script and he just killed it in the film. I mean, he's a very emotional actor. He speaks through his eyes, you know, and that's what this film needed. There's a lot of things that this movie says without saying it, because of the material. You know, I told these guys, if you're going to make this film, don't make one scene, not 3 seconds, that would make a pedophile happy. That would be material. You know, so tell the story without telling it. And they did that very well through just art and lighting and different, just amazing things you'll see in the film. But Caviezel's part of that. He helps you see. I mean, he communicates to the audience more often than not without his mouth. And when you watch the film, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah.
So he was the right choice.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to see it, and I can't wait for our audience to see it as well. The movie is The Sound of Freedom. It comes out on July 4th. My guest has been Tim Ballard. And Tim, how can people, if they want to help this cause at our rescue, what do people, tell us the website, where can people go to help be a part of this and to solve this problem?
Right now the ask that we have is to go to angel.com and buy tickets. To angel.com, go buy tickets to Sound of Freedom. And then, you know, watch that film and you'll know what to do. And I'd also encourage people to go to the NazareneFund.org, where I'm the CEO, that we're doing that work we talked about with our organ harvesting. And if you remember the Afghani movement, when we pulled out 10,000 people out of Afghanistan in the wake of the abandonment there. So there's a lot of amazing work there. So, but yeah, people need to filter. We want 2 million people in the theaters, representing the 2 million children currently in the commercial sex trade. We want 2 million people there on the week of July 4th. And if you go to angel.com, you can buy tickets for your family, but also you can pay it forward and buy tickets for others. So there's been 300,000 tickets purchased already just for other people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford the film. So it's a really cool program. Last I heard yesterday, Sound of Freedom is outselling Indiana Jones 3-1.